Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the health sessions. Um, there will be time at the end of this call for questions. I just mentioned this before starting to hit record, but I see a couple more people just came in. If you want to ask a question after or in the chat, that's fine. If you ask and unmute, then you'll be on the recording. So, hi, and welcome to the Held Sessions, honest midlife conversations to help you feel held, nourished, resourced, and rooted in yourself again. I'm Shauna Lane, nervous system and unconscious mind coach, and the founder of Held. And this is a free community where we explore the magic of midlife, ask honest questions, and get real, actionable guidance from experts on everything from anxiety and sleep to hormones and grief and caring for aging parents and all the things. And I'm so glad that you are here spending your valuable time with us today for Marriage and Perimenopause, Meeting Change Together with Brooke Davis. So Brooke is a healthcare leader, midlife marriage educator, and creator of the popular Marriage and Perimenopause Instagram account, which I've been collaborating with a little bit recently. And over the 20 years in healthcare administration, and an MBA, Brooke brings sharp, research driven lens to the ways hormone changes in midlife impact mood, stress, and connection. Her work helps couples recognize that midlife is not just a personal transition, it's a relational one. And she teaches couples how to navigate changing emotional needs, stress capacity, communication patterns, and support systems so that they can stay connected and evolve together through this stage of life. And she's created the Hormone Informed Midlife Marriage course. And there's a framework as well to help couples navigate these trying times. And I'm so honored to welcome Brooke Davis to the conversation. Welcome, Brooke.
Hi, thank you so much, Shauna. Excited to be here today. And thanks for everyone that's joined.
Yeah. Um, let's just dive right in if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a quote in your framework that really stopped me. And like right in the beginning, you say that hormone shifts in midlife change more than just your body. They change how you process emotions, handle stress, experience intimacy, and show up in your relationships. And most couples were never taught how to recognize, name, or navigate that. And I think that's the most important piece. Like we are expected to know things that we have never been taught. And even like perimenopause is kind of new, right? Like, has that been modeled for us? So,
Yeah.
so many women are like now understanding more about perimenopause, and they're doing this work of understanding what's happening to them. Um, but their relationships are still struggling. So there's so much here. What brought you into this research, and what made you want to build something so that couples could actually use this together to improve their relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that you said, what really sparked all of this for us, and me and my spouse, is that we weren't taught any of this. So we had no idea what to expect when it showed up. And, honestly, it started because I kept seeing the same patterns over and over again. So we as women, we were struggling emotionally, mentally, physically. And then in turn, our marriages were struggling too, but nobody really connected those dots in a meaningful way. And I noticed, couples interpreting very biological and nervous system changes as, things like relationship failure or personality changes, or even saying we're just not compatible anymore. And I remember thinking back, like, how are millions of couples going through this without language for it? Like, what are we doing? And, the more that I researched into perimenopause, menopause, stress physiology, emotional regulation, sleep disruption, testosterone decline, relationship psychology, I mean, all these things, the more obvious it became that, of course, hormones affect far more than our reproductive health. Of course, it does. And they affect how we experience ourselves, how we tolerate stress, how connected we feel, and how reactive we become, and even how emotionally safe we feel. And that just blew my mind that was happening within our own body. And a majority of couples were never taught any of that because I was taught zero of that as well. And so that's how I come to this framework, the hormone informed marriage framework. It's a way of translating all of this into more like plain language so couples could actually use it in real life. So it just kind of goes back to what you said, that none of us knew that this was coming. None of us knew exactly what hormones did and how they, behave in our body and how it impacts us. So that's where I came from.
Yeah. And, it's this interesting idea too, how so much of the medical things that we understand have been studied on men's bodies for so many years, right?
Yeah.
It's been like since the 90s or something that we started studying women's bodies and really understanding that. And it's just like, I mean, the proof is in the pudding in just looking at the following that you have on Instagram and just the response that you get from women who are reading these posts saying like, yeah, this is me, like this is my relationship and this is happening to me. And to a point where it's like heartbreaking, like why is everybody going through the same thing? And you have such a
Right.
gift of being able to like really like go through the data. It's like very research informed. And I love that about it. It's like this is what's happening and this is what we can do about it. And I really love that about your framework that I've been going through as well. But
Good. Thank you.
one thing that you point out, which I think is really important that like rings really true for me, is that we really need to start being honest with what beliefs we carry about this stage of life and what we may be having a hard time saying out loud, right? Like, what
Yeah.
do we know about what it means to be like a midlife woman? Like, many women that I know are even like, I'm not midlife. And it's like, kind of, yeah. Like, oh, this isn't perimenopause. Like, yeah, actually
Yes.
it is. So,
Yes.
um, what are we believing about this? Many women believe that they're becoming invisible, that their best
Mhm.
years are behind them, that they're not
Yep.
sexy anymore. Like, there's so many things that we think about it
Yeah.
that maybe are just like running in the back of our minds that we're not saying out loud. And what did we
Yes.
learn by watching the women in our lives go through this and what
Yeah.
that looks like? So
Absolutely.
midlife, midlife to me is like this season of taking off our armor, right? Really getting a lot more honest with ourselves. And that means looking
Yeah.
at this stuff too. And if we're willing to really look inward and tell the truth, can our relationships hold the version of us that is real?
Yeah.
And do you
I
think
think
that
you're
that's what women are most afraid of?
I think you're right on. And absolutely, I kind of touch through, some of that in some of my content, but also in thinking about what this life really is, for women and especially in midlife, because I think a lot of us, inherited silence around midlife. Yeah, honestly, I
Yeah.
think, thriving in midlife was not modeled for most women. It was sold to us as a decline, essentially. And I think what we're seeing is that, that our current generation and the generations coming after us are saying no, we don't want to be in decline, with what we consider midlife. And I agree with you, a lot of people don't like to think that they're in midlife, but when you just think about the numbers and you think about, yeah, if you are over, close to 40, you're in midlife, essentially. I mean, our life expectancy for women is just in the early 80s is what the average life expectancy is. So we're
Yeah.
in the middle of our life and how we
Yeah.
think about that. And I think many of us, grew up watching mothers, grandmothers, aunts, white knuckle their way through this part of life, because nobody really explained to them what was happening either. And it was
Yeah.
often framed as things like, she's just, moody, or she's difficult, or she's, losing it, or she's too emotional, she's grouchy. And those were even terms that I even kind of thought about some of my relatives, not knowing what was happening to them. I never
Yeah.
once heard anybody say things like her nervous system's overloaded. I've never heard anybody say hormones were fluctuating. I never heard anybody say she's exhausted because she's carrying too much. I never
Yeah.
heard those things, right?
No.
All the things that we heard were, negative towards the person. And
Mm.
I think, as women, we really learned very early that being easy and low maintenance and endlessly accommodating was highly rewarded. And then when midlife shows up and our body stops cooperating with that role, then that kind of makes other people feel uncomfortable, that we're not willing, to be easily accommodating anymore, that we're trying to seek our truth. And I think that's why it feels so confronting. It's not just hormones, it's really decades of like suppressed needs, stress, resentment, probably, especially
Yeah.
carrying the emotional mental labor. And all of this is surfacing at the same time, right? When we're going through this big biological hormonal change. But I do like to refer to it as a midlife awakening. I really like
Yeah.
that way better. Some people like to try to call it a midlife crisis. I don't think that's exactly what it is. I think what it is coming of truth, exactly to
Yeah.
what you're saying. So I don't think many of us were modeled, about this being an evolving process. And this is, something new. And we get to actually follow our dreams and desires now because we spent so many years, maybe suppressing that because we were caregiving and caretaking and, tending to our relationships and, going for our jobs and giving it all to that. So I think it's definitely an awakening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as like an unfolding, which is the same, like on
I
that
like
same
that.
line, right?
Hmm.
And it's interesting, you're talking about how, like, what other people might say about women in midlife, but even like the women in my world would even say, like, oh, you're having a birthday. I'm 29 again. Like, we would never be like, oh, I just turned 46. Like, no, it's like, like
Mhm.
30, maybe 39 is like the max. And
Yeah,
then after that, like,
right.
you never ask a woman their age because it's like
Yeah,
shameful to be a certain age. And
yeah.
we may think like in our conscious mind, like, oh, I don't believe that. But really reflecting on like what does it mean to actually like own your age and the time of life that you're in and do that. And if we're not
Mhm.
doing that, how is that reflecting in the mirror of our relationships, right? As
Right.
our spouses are mirroring back to us what we're, putting out there. I think this is
Mhm.
such a huge important point and that you bring up in the framework. And I don't like,
Yeah.
honestly, I was so excited about going through like your work and learning about what you're doing. And it's so like triggering and on point for so many people. But part of me was kind of thinking, like, what is it going to say? What is it going to say that's going to like really make a difference? And then like already like day one, day two, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is hitting me in parts that I definitely need to reflect on this stuff, even myself, like even, being part of this community. So it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, it's
But
kind of like
I,
you think about the things you just didn't know, right? Like a lot of things
yeah.
that's surfacing in midlife. I think that these we just weren't, we didn't realize that we were allowed, on some parts of
Hmm.
things. Like we didn't realize that we were allowed to say, like, I don't want to do it like this anymore. We didn't realize that we could speak up and say, this is what my needs are sometimes. And that is kind of a reckoning as well, as you might say, as we get to this point in life. And there's several things that go along with that. And I think we're getting ready to hit one of those topics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting like what we think is allowed or not allowed and what we also like allow for ourselves. Like we can be introspective enough to say like, okay, am I letting myself want things and like
Yeah.
desire things or say no? And but yeah, what I'm going to bring up next is this idea of midlife rage, which is like, I don't know, it's like all over my my social media feed right now. And especially given like what's happening like in the world, especially
Right.
around like women and children, it's like women are angry, particularly midlife women. And
Yes.
I remember as a child really not being allowed to be angry. Like that was not okay. Like good girls don't get angry and you don't talk back, you don't yell. None of these things are allowed, right?
Hmm.
And but a lot of this really comes to the surface during this stage of life, especially in response to our partners.
Yes,
And
I
so
agree.
what's your take on midlife rage and this whole thing?
Yeah, I actually think rage is often misunderstood. Sometimes it is hormones amplifying the nervous system because, yes, definitely estrogen and progesterone fluctuations can absolutely affect emotional regulation or stress tolerance, even sensory processing. But
Yeah.
underneath that, I think women are experiencing accumulated overload of life. We've just
Mhm.
gotten to that point, that we are overloaded. And a lot of time, midlife is when women say, I can't carry things the same way anymore, or I don't want to carry things like the same way anymore. And that realization collides with decades of conditioning. And we talked a little bit about that around caregiving, being the self-sacrifice of your family and your children. Of course, keeping everything running smoothly for everyone else, making sure that, life is well for everyone else except for us, unfortunately, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, I think, what some people call rage is often, a combination of biological sensitivity and emotional truth, but now it's just much harder to suppress. And like you talk about the nervous system, it just has less buffer now. And so things really get to us a whole lot quicker than they used to. And
Yep.
unfortunately, the people closest to us often feel that anger or that rage or that fire, right? And for many women, it is their spouse. And I think the reason
Mm,
why is because that's who we feel emotionally safe with. That's the person that we can be the most fully ourselves with. And that does kind of impact, them in that situation. And, I
mm,
think many women, midlife is the first time that their body stops allowing them to silence themselves. Like, you just can't do this anymore. We can't be silent about it. And,
yeah.
the needs that we minimized over life kind of start demanding our attention.
Mm,
we realize that we have not had those needs met. And exhaustion that was ignored becomes really impossible to push through now. And resentment. I think a lot of women
yeah.
carry resentment in their relationships. It
Hmm.
does come and rise to the surface during this time. And then also boundaries that we never really either expressed or held people to suddenly become very important to us because you kind of start realizing things. You're like, I've let people walk all over me, or I've let, these types of things happen and said it was okay when it really wasn't something that I was okay with. And,
Hmm.
while that can feel messy at sometimes, I also think that there's something deeply honest about it because healthy relationships require so much truth to it. And you
Yeah.
can't suppress needs anymore. You can't endlessly shift to keep everybody else comfortable now and not carrying everything silently until you disappear in your own life. That's just not what we're designed to do. And it is a time of reckoning in that point. So I think, midlife is really learning how to express what we need just in a
Hmm.
clearer, more intentional ways instead of continue to hold everything in until your nervous system explodes. Because that I think is what we're seeing in some people, that is kind of happening because they suppress, and then now they're exploding. Um, and that becomes the explosive rage. That is the hell, fire, and fury
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
sometimes see. But I don't see midlife rage as something bad. I really think it is that awakening and that truth finding, and really, speaking that out now. A lot of people see it as rage because they're not used to seeing women be so vocal and say what they need and what they want and how they want it to happen, what they want more of, what they want less of. And I think that is what people think of. They're like, oh my gosh, she's mad, she's angry at this. And yes, it does spark emotion in
Mm,
us, like exactly what you said, what's happening politically, what's happening in our world. It's because we are living at the edge, the surface right now. And we're saying, this is not right. And we're not standing for it. So I think that's
yeah.
what we're really seeing. And people are rallying. I see women rallying together. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that part of it for sure. And I see like what you're saying about spending so much of your life suppressing our needs, suppressing like not having boundaries, just kind of taking things that we, don't really want to. I think about
Yeah.
kind of like a can, like a can of soda or something with a lid, and you like it's like being shaken and shaken and shaken, and it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna open it. And
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
if there was no lid on it all the time, it would just sort of come out naturally. But then it's like because we've been like suppressing for so long, it just like
Yeah.
yeah. And hopefully we have the type of partner who can navigate this with us and with that, support of this type of work that you're doing and really like, help us with our understanding, our communication and all of that. Um, and especially because our spouses, like often we're choosing people that are going to help us to like heal things that are old things, heal things that are like issues with our dads or like our caregivers growing up, and all of that stuff starts to come back out through as we're healing relationships from the past through our partners. So having them be able to be, stable enough and like committed enough that we can actually work through these things together is brilliant. But
Mhm.
there's something that is in your framework that talks about like, okay, doing this together. And I know a lot of women are thinking, like, my husband would never. Like, let's watch a 10-minute video together on hormone changes. Like, my husband would never. So, what about the spouses who are not enthusiastically participating? And I have to give a shout out to like this handful of men that have been commenting on our posts saying, like, hey, like, how can I better support my wife during this time? And it's like, I'm like standing up and applauding these men because they're like, yes, how can I support her? But that's not all of them, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
I think so. And I think this is really important, like you said, because not every spouse is jumping up and down and saying, "Tell me everything about hormones and tell me what's going on and tell me this and tell me that." I'll get into some of the reasons why, but first, I kind of want to frame it as a little bit differently. You know, when we are experiencing these changes and things, and we're noticing things, not only that are, things that we're feeling emotionally, things that we're feeling physically, right? Like we are having that experience, whereas they're seeing it from the outside, right? So they're not quite having the same experience that we're having. They're relying on us to provide some content to them or context, I should say, context to them about what's going on. But then it kind of goes back to the same thing, like we were talking about, that although perimenopause is getting its little time in the sun right now, it's still not widely aware to women and about what's changing in their life and what's happening during midlife. And so that's where couples, I think, get real confused because women, I didn't know what's happened to me. It took me a couple years to figure it out. So we can't really get our spouses to quite understand exactly what it is that we're experiencing. So I just want to kind of give that caveat. Some spouses feel very confused about it. I mean, I've had many men message me, send me DMs, all this stuff. I don't know what's going on. She says one thing, I try to do this thing, it makes her mad. I not don't do it, and then she gets mad again. And I'm so confused and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, yes, I get that. I did that exactly to my husband. Because I didn't know what was changing. And some of them feel blamed, like they feel blamed for things. Some of them feel very defensive about it, like because they feel like something they're doing is causing these reactions in their wife. And it might be some of that, but sometimes it's our changes that are happening to us that's making us like be more reactive or be more emotional or those types of things. And some are just overwhelmed themselves. I tell you, I mean, some spouses are also drowning in what's going on in their life too, while this is also happening to their wife. Um, and then some just generally don't understand why this feels so big. Where they're like, I don't get it. Like, you have hormones, great. You don't have hormones, whatever. Like, they just don't get it. Okay. And then we have to think about it. These changes are happening at the exact same time in life that we are under a lot of demands already. We have our careers, we have aging parents or aging family members sometimes that we're helping out with. We're still raising our own kids. We might have teenagers or young adults we're trying to help. We've got a lot of financial pressures in midlife. We're trying to think about our future. What does that hold for us? We've got health changes. Probably both of us do. Your husband probably has sleep apnea, those types of things are happening. Things are percolating for us as women too because of all the hormonal changes we're having. We're starting to have cardiovascular issues, we're having bone issues, we're having a lot of things that are occurring. And then some people are just burnt out by this time of life. We've gone, 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 gone. We've raised kids, we've had jobs, we've changed things, we've moved across the countries, whatever. We're burnt out. And then on top of that, we can't sleep. And the list just goes on and on and on. So sometimes
yeah.
the resistance is not always out of a lack of love or a lack of care. It's a lot of these things that I just talked about that's compounding and happening on top of it. And sometimes it's just because there's confusion, there's fear, there's overwhelm, and there's just not knowing how to help or what to do. And really
Yeah.
think about it. How many men were ever socialized to think about hormones, emotional regulation, nervous systems, or relationship dynamics in this kind of way? I would say it's pretty low. I don't have a statistic on that. I would like to
Yeah.
find one. And if you have one, Sean, I'd like for you to share it. So when the relationship starts feeling more reactive or distant or tense, they're usually just spinning their wheels and they're trying to interpret something they don't know how to understand. So both of us are lost at this
Yeah.
point. And so usually I tell women, let's start small, let's lower the pressure. Don't make the first step because we need to completely overhaul our marriage. That's a lot, right? So, the first step, might be let's sit down and kind of talk about some things that are happening to both of us. We're both under a lot of pressure. We're both under a lot of stress. But I think it's really something that we need to learn together because hormones are a big part of it. And it's things that are changing my health and it's changing how I feel emotionally. It's changing how I feel mentally. It's changing how I show up in our relationship. And then also, we're going to talk about andropause in a minute, but also, our spouses are undergoing some hormonal changes as well. And it's like we need to get on, a very same page of what's happening now and what these changes are for us. And when we
Yeah.
don't have a framework, we personalize everything, right? Believe me, I've been there. I personalize everything. you know,
Yeah.
I might snap at my spouse because it's something that he said, and but in my brain, I'm personalizing he deserved that, because he said
Mm-hmm.
this or his intention was that. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, we had a lot of arguments over things that if we would have sat down, level set about why we are feeling the way we're feeling, what the stresses is, and those types of things, we might have really gotten through some of our earlier stages of perimenopause a lot better, but we
Yeah.
didn't know. So that's what I want to get at. And I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
a huge fan of regular marriage check-ins or marriage meetings, even though they
Yeah.
sound incredibly unromantic. It's very unromantic, but extremely necessary because otherwise, you're trying to communicate, major emotional needs through random comments typically that we'll make, right? You pass in the kitchen and say, I'd like you to clean off the counter because if the counter is messy, it makes me feel stressed out. We're saying things like that as we're walking by or while we're
Or at
multitasking.
bedtime, right? Always like
Yeah.
in bed,
Or
I'm like,
yeah.
hey, that, and he's like, now, really?
Yeah. At 11
That's
o'clock, we're
okay.
both
Yeah.
exhausted, but let me
Yeah.
tell you what makes me angry.
Mhm. And it starts a fight, and yeah.
you know, they
Nobody's
don't
sleeping. Yeah.
That's right. They don't go well. So intentionally planned conversations work so much better than these emotional drive-by comments.
Mhm.
And a lot of us
Mhm.
have communicated that way for decades. And they
Yeah,
don't land the same way anymore. And we have to remember we're not
totally.
mind readers. I think we get to a point in a relationship, especially if it's a long-standing relationship, that we just assume that, our spouse knows what we need and when we need it. And or we think
Mhm.
things like if they love me enough, they would know what I need. Boy,
Mhm.
that's a major backfire.
And do we even know what we need?
Sometimes we
Do we
don't.
even
Sometimes we
know?
don't. And midlife really exposes how much has gone unspoken for a very long time. I think that's
Yeah.
very much key. So you have to be more explicit, more intentional, things that you might have
Mhm.
assumed over the years. And it's not really the same kind of playing field anymore. It's not a sign of
Yeah.
failure at all, that you have to explicitly say what your needs are. It's a sign that your
Mhm.
relationship is maturing actually
Mhm.
into deeper communication and a more of a conscious partnership rather than
Mhm.
just being reactive all the time. I think a lot of people get stuck in this reactive, cycle quite
Mhm.
frequently. And it's really easy for us to villainize each other, our
Yeah.
partners,
But
and,
it
and
can be
really
so
try to
hard to ask for. It can be
it
so hard
can.
to ask for what we want. But you
It,
mentioned something, I don't want to cut
mhm.
you off, but you
I know.
have something in your framework that's about like mapping and tracking. And this is like such
Yes.
a practical thing that like, and my ADHD brain does not like really do that naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, pattern recognition, yes, but like actually
Hmm.
mapping and tracking what happens and what level are we at? And we're having a strategy to acknowledge what helps and what makes things worse. Like, okay, we did
Yes.
this and it worked and it didn't work. And of course, we need
Yep.
like our partners to be on board to say, like, okay,
Yes.
we're going to try this and see how it goes. And be like, well, I did the thing you said and you were still mean. And it's like, okay, well, let's let's try to work something else out, right? But really
Yes.
having those like regular meetings and like actually mapping
Yeah.
and tracking. And I just want to mention this because it's huge, is that most men think that like when you speak to your partner they'll say, I should never say most men, but this is my experience and my experience in other like coaching programs and stuff is that men will be like, everything's fine. We don't need to do anything. Like, don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, everything is going fine. But when you really sit down and say, like, but what if it could be like this? Like, what if we could be
Mhm.
really connecting? What if we could be like more intimate? What if we could be like more honest and like letting go of the little resentments and stuff? And like, honestly, we all want that same thing. Right.
Yeah.
So, and if we can like frame it that way, then it's like, okay, well, if we could sit down for like 30 minutes a week and do this stuff, like we can both have that thing that we want.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is kind of exactly what the framework's designed to do. It's done over weeks. It's not done all in one day, right? We don't make
Mhm.
meaningful change in a short amount of time. It takes weeks, months, over time to do that. But it's really kind of designed to fast track about 5 weeks that you really spend a week on one section of the framework to really dive in and take that time. You might want to really sit down for an hour during, maybe a Sunday afternoon, it's better for you, or whatever, Friday afternoon, whatever works the best, and really dive into the topic, right? And then really kind
Mhm.
of do your own work. Then you both share your work, and then you both kind of create a plan together from that work. So that way it's a
Yeah.
collaborative approach. You get to share your truth, they share their truth, and then you say, where do we meet and where do we collaborate on how the things that we're going to do for this next week? And then the next week builds on that. And I think that's where you see meaningful progress. And if something's not
Yeah.
working right, you scratch it, you ditch it, you throw it in the trash, whatever.
Mhm.
But you might find that something works very well. And then it could be something that actually really helps you, maybe with the mental load, maybe the emotional load, maybe the things that you were so frustrated with in your relationship that your spouse
Mhm.
didn't realize that you were, overwhelmed with. Um, and they're like, hey, I can carry that for you. Like, I can totally do that.
Yeah.
And you're
Mhm.
like, would you do that? And they're like, yeah, I'll do that. And you're like, oh gosh. And it's just like, it
Yeah.
just major relief. That was something that even my spouse and I experienced, that I felt like I had to do this one certain thing all the time. If not, the whole world was just going to end. Clearly it wasn't, but that's how my mind was thinking. And when I shared that, and he was like, I can do that. Like, I didn't realize that you were so obsessed with it, like, and why. And I explained why I was. And he's like, no, you can trust me. I can do that. And he did it. And it was like such a relief for me. It wasn't a huge thing, like it was just something that to me felt big. And he was able to take that on. And I felt like my life just got 10 times easier. And it was
Mhm.
just because I was emotionally attached to it, right? And then when I
Yeah.
could trust that he could do it,
Well, we
I
step
could
into
let it.
these roles that we think like we
Yes,
assume like this is my role, this is your role, these are the things that we need to
yes,
do. And without
yes.
actually like sitting down and saying like, and it's
Hmm.
not like I do 50%, you do 50%. It doesn't have to
No,
be that way, but it's like these are some things that I really hate doing. Can we talk about it? Or it's like
yeah,
just as I assume that it's my job, but it's never even been discussed, right?
yeah,
Maybe they don't even
exactly.
realize that it's something that you're doing, right?
Yeah, and
But
like morning routine, right, with kids or things like that. I had a friend that
yeah.
they had to rehaul their whole morning routine because it was overwhelming her and creating so much anxiety for her. And that once her spouse understood what was causing that anxiety, he was able to, get the kids up and get them fed and
Mhm.
get their clothes on, while she could actually get up and take a shower and not be so woo, trying to get the kids out of bed. One kid won't get out of bed. Kid don't want to wear this clothes. Kid won't put the shoes on. Those things that get you crazy.
Yeah.
So he would take over that part of the morning. Then he would leave, and then she would just have to get them, get their book bags together, get them in the car, and get them to school. She was doing the whole morning routine. And he didn't realize that it was creating such anxiety for her. And she's like, I can't do this anymore. And this is why. And he's like, I
Mhm.
can totally do that. Like, I
Yeah.
had no idea,
Yeah.
and it was to her, it was life altering.
Yeah. And they probably went years not realizing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she would leave in such anxiety driven mindset that she couldn't really do her job when she got to it.
Mm.
She was so spun up and had so much anxiety that she wasn't productive. And it finally, came to a head, and he was like, I'm doing this part for you. I'm gonna get the kids up. I'm going to do
Oh.
these things. I'm going to take care of it. And then she's like, my life just completely changed. And it was
And
just
then you
because
feel like you're on the same team. Yeah.
Yeah, and they just didn't really have that conversation. He couldn't see that, right? And it was just
Yeah.
because it fell to her, right? It was something
Yeah.
they'd never changed for years. So I think that's
Um,
super important. So yes, absolutely. And you're talking about tracking and doing these types of things. I think pattern recognition, and you talking about being great at pattern recognition, is huge. You know, when I think about tracking, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a symptoms chart, but really what I think about is like developing awareness and pattern tracking. So I think about like start noticing the patterns, like when does conflict escalate for us? Is it late in the afternoon after we're both tired? Is it certain times of the month? Is it when somebody has to work late? Whatever. And, what is going to be our plan for that? How, okay,
yeah.
we've tracked this pattern. We know when it happens. We know how it works. What do we do to make sure that we can minimize it or make it better for both of us, when this time happens? What overstimulates you on what days or weeks or time frames, or what are the things like, is it not getting enough sleep? Did I not sleep well? Those types of things. When do
Mm,
you feel disconnected from me? That's huge. People don't even realize that. Like my husband told me the other night, I was sitting on the couch and I was just scrolling. I was doom scrolling for my brain, right? I didn't need to do that. But he's like, you're not paying any attention to me. And I'm like, you're right, I'm not. Put my phone down. And we just jumped on the couch together. Like we just have that way of recognizing that now. And I don't get frustrated about it. Like he's just pointing out something. I can point out something to him too, and he doesn't be like, "What do you mean? I've got to take care of this."
yeah.
It's not the conversation it's anymore. It's like we've recognized a pattern. So I
Yeah.
think
That's so
that
good.
that's really huge. And
Mm,
when you think about like in my framework, I kind of talk about things. You got to think about things like what helps, what hurts, and what are the signs that we're getting overloaded. If you can come up with those conversations and kind of talk about that, because when you get to that point of overwhelm or you're having a bad day, they kind of know what helps you, what doesn't help you. And you can get better at communicating that overwhelm better. You can come into the door and say like, man, it was a rough day, I'm going to need about 15 minutes to decompress, I'll see you then. And your spouse is not like, what do you mean you're abandoning me? No, they're like, okay, I got it, I'm going to get dinner started, you go listen to some music, take a bath, whatever, I'll see you in a few minutes. Because he knows he can't keep talking to me during that time, because it's only
mm,
going to stimulate me more, make me more frustrated, make me angry, and I'm going to
yeah.
lose it. And so when I say, hey, I
Mm,
need 15 minutes to decompress, he's like, you go, girl, you go do it. Because I don't want your
yeah.
wrath.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of, we were going to talk about andropause, and
Yeah.
apparently, we have our lunar cycles that are monthly, and the male cycle is in a 24-hour cycle. So their lowest testosterone, if I'm remembering correctly, is like late afternoon. And
Yep.
so that like after work time, they're like actually depleted. And so we want to be like, oh, I have PMS and like luteal or like whatever the things are that
Yep.
we're sharing with them, but they are actually having dips too. And I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
focus this call too much on like the male experience, but it's like a real thing.
It
And the
is.
truth is too is that men are carrying so much shame, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of times their performance is really, their identity is riding on their performance. And so when their
True.
testosterone dips and their performance drops, then they tend to like withdraw or really like
Mm-hmm.
seek external validation. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like needing to feel so validated and like appreciated. And meanwhile, we're
Yeah.
like resentful and
Mm-hmm.
hormonal and angry and whatever. And they want appreciation for taking out the garbage, which like you've done all week or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's when we start kind of like bumping heads, right?
It's true.
So
It's so true. And I'm glad you're mentioning andropause, and because that, what I like to say is, yes, we are going through, women, a very significant biological change. And usually our husbands are going right along with us. And so we have this collision of things that are happening. And exactly what you're saying, Shauna, it's usually the opposite of kind of what they need, is that external validation, where we need our space. We need to, feel calm. We need to decompress. We need to not be touched so much, like those things that really set us off because of the sensory overload that typically goes along with hormonal changes as well. And I think that creates some of that disconnection. And having these sit down talks and talking about that really opens up the conversation. But so testosterone decline for men typically declines about 1% per year, starting in their 30s, somewhere around their 30s. And not every man will go into andropause, clinical andropause. That is, clinically diagnosed low testosterone levels. And then men can get, testosterone replacement if their levels are really low. Some men will never really get there, but they don't have the same amount of testosterone as they did when they were a young buck. Okay, they're not going to. And so, when they get to this point of life, you got to think about, so in their 30s. So if your husband, is in his 50s, so that 1% every year is added up on what he's lost on his testosterone. And shocking, testosterone does not just affect libido, right? And, you got to think about, here's I'm going to tell you a little list here. So for men, it can influence their motivation, their confidence, their mood, their energy, their stress tolerance, their emotional resilience, their sleep, their body composition, their drive, their focus, their sense of identity and vitality. Sound familiar?
Yep.
Sounds like what's happening to us. So where testosterone is really feeding for them, for us as women, our estrogen, our progesterone, and our testosterone all together are causing very similar, symptoms, very similar ways of feeling as well, too. And you talked about how it shows up for men. They might withdraw. They might have irritability. They might just overwork themselves, right? Because they're trying to have that validation that, that they're still worthy.
Or buy a convertible and get a younger
Yes. And
woman.
we get into these stereotypical midlife
Motorcycle.
symbols, right? They're looking to connect with their youth, their freedom, all these things. But, I think, underneath all that, they do have deep fears, just like we do, around aging, around if they're relevant or not anymore, around their masculinity. I mean, that's huge, and their purpose as well. So I think they're going through this change as well. And so
Yeah.
let's talk about that. It's two people simultaneously moving through overlapping nervous system changes, hormonal changes, stress shifts, identity shifts, and we're doing it without a roadmap. And we're just
Yeah.
expected to know how to do this together. I think that's very destabilizing for a marriage, that this is happening on both ends. And so typically
Mhm.
what ends up happening is we argue about the external effects that we're seeing. We can't really see the internal changes, right, that's happening to us, but we react to mood changes, we react to irritability, we react to shortness, with our partner, we react to, maybe, withdrawing or being distant. That's what starts our arguments. And those are all caused by a lot of changes that we're having happening to our body. And most
Yeah.
people don't know that.
Yeah. And I think hormone changes or not, the shame that men typically carry
Mm-hmm.
just from like the way that they're raised as being like, strong boys and just, the way that they're raised societally. Um,
Yep.
it's like we seek this like feeling of safety and being really seen, right? It's like you want to feel safe with your partner and you want them to really see you and all the things that you're going through and how hard it is for you. And you just want them to be your safe place, right? But when we really like share how we're feeling about things, often there's like a little percentage of something that they're doing that like could be better. And then they take it as being attacking their worth, right? So then the defensiveness comes up and then it's like, oh, this whole back and forth. And you end up feeling like you're both like waiting at different doors, like knocking on the door looking for love, but you're at different doors.
I love
My
that analogy.
therapist told us that like a few sessions ago, like, oh, you're both knocking on different doors looking for the same thing. Right. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I just want you to see me, that I'm doing this, that I'm having this hard time. And
Yeah.
and then everything that comes out feels like an attack. And so it's it's just so heartbreaking to know like when two people really want the same thing,
Yes.
but they're looking for it in different places. So I
Yeah.
think, and I love our couples therapist and she's brilliant and it's really helpful to be able to like talk things through and all of that. But she doesn't have this framework. Like we're not getting these same kind of strategies of like, okay, well, are you doing this first? Are you doing this? Like, are you checking off these boxes? And so
Yeah.
I think what you're offering is really super powerful and very specific to people going through these specific like times and
And
changes.
that's one reason why I wanted to create it. I'm not a therapist. However, I am very much someone that thrives on some structure. And when this was my husband and I were going through this together, I created something that I wish we would have had. And that is structure for me, right? And so it was very methodical about each step, about each thing that we needed to, think about, what we should have been talking about, what I wish we would have done, all those things. And it is kind of like the toolkit that you use before you go to therapy, right? So you're kind of already putting in some work, you're having some conversations, you're kind of getting level set on the education, is what I like to say, because you're learning about some of the biology, you're learning about the changes that are happening. You're also learning that, the symptoms and the things that are coming from these biological changes are not like personal attacks. They're not, personality changes. They're not things that are, just making you a different person. These are just, your body is going through change. And I think once you can get that on paper and kind of understand that, and then if you are still struggling with communication or you can't get on the same page, I think that's where therapy kind of comes in. I think therapy kind of helps you work through some of those harder communication issues. Maybe you've had some things from your past, maybe you have some triggers you can't get over, maybe there's, things that, you just can't get over from, like you said, your childhood. Maybe you had your
Mm.
parent structures were different. There was some things I went to therapy for me personally that were some things that when perimenopause surfaced for me brought up some very deep hurts and wounds from when I was a younger person, even before, I became, husband, met my husband. And I needed to deal with that. I thought that I had dealt with that. And when I started these hormonal changes, they all bubbled up to the surface. And I couldn't handle them like I could before. Like, I was good at stuffing them way back and saying, that's whatever, I'm over that, whatever. No, I was never over it. So I did some personal therapy, and that really helped me get over some hurts that I had that I was still holding on to. And, so this framework was just really developed about here's you some structure to get started, get you both on a similar playing field. I don't want to say the same page because it's similar playing field. You might be on the 40 yard line. I might be on this other side, but at least we're having these conversations. We're having some structure about it. I don't think any couple really has sat down that I know of that says, do you know anything about hormones and how they change in midlife? Because when I asked my husband that, and he's a biology major, and studied a lot of things, not necessarily hormones, but had a good understanding how things work, he said no. He's like, no, I don't know what none of those hormones do. He said, I know that you need estrogen and I need testosterone, and like he gets that, but he's like, I have no idea what happens when they go away. And I was like, I didn't either. So like just having that general conversation was huge, but it came late. It took us about a year to figure out what was going on in our relationship, and it was rough. It was rough. And it wasn't that I didn't think we were going to make it. It was so hard every day. Like there wasn't even easy days. Like it was just sad. And, finally I started learning and researching and all these things and bringing it to him and saying, this is what's happening to us. Can you believe it? And, he was at first like, oh, I don't know. But then when we really started talking about it, really looking at it, and I was like, get out your biology glasses and put them back on. We've got to look at this together, and just kind of going through it. And he was like, dang, I didn't realize that, this would make, you feel like that, or, this would happen. And as the more we looked into it, we're like, dang, this is so rooted. Like it was just clear. And we
Yeah.
stopped attacking each other then, and we had some self-compassion, and then we had compassion for each other. Because I was the one always going, I just got to push through this. I've got to do it better. I've got to be, bolder. I just got to do 55 more
Yeah.
sit-ups, whatever. I was
Hmm.
really, really doing a disservice to myself. And then, like I said, we can't see what's happened to someone internally, but once we have context around it, we can offer compassion. And he actually, was offering me compassion to when I'd have a bad day and when things were going wrong. And it really made me feel like a different person, that I could say, I really shouldn't have snapped at you earlier. I was really, irritated, frustrated. And he was like, look, you're having a hard day, and I can see that. It wasn't that he's validating that I could be mean to him, but he was just saying like, hey, I know this is rough on you. I don't want you to snap at me,
Yeah.
but I understand this is hard on you. And it would make me be like, thank you. Thank you for
Mhm.
recognizing that. And I'm sorry. Like I could
Yeah.
actually be that person. And it just felt so validating. So validating.
Yeah, to meet together and be on the same team about it. Like the team is the marriage, it's the relationship. And then each of you is coming in with all of your own stuff that you're dealing with. And I'm saying you, but mine too, all of us.
Right.
And I love how this work that you're doing is like the bridge, right? So, in my community, I work with women one-on-one in a 30-day coaching container, really supporting all of those things, like releasing those triggers, helping to build confidence, coming into yourself, really like learning to trust yourself again. And then, there's some incredible groups out there for men and one-on-one coaching for men specifically, which I think is like even more beneficial to really come at it from that perspective of like, what do you need right now as a man? And like all of the things that you have, learned societally, like I mentioned before, and how to get through that, especially at this stage of life. And then having tools to come together and be able to, share language around what's happening and to feel like you're on the same team. And then the nervous system regulation, like you were saying, like I'll plug my own held portal, which is, breath work, somatic work for actually just like moving stress through your body, like finding ways to move that through so that when you can come together, like even the best meditators in the world who can sit for hours and meditate, they're not doing that as soon as they wake up in the morning. They're like working in the fields first. You have to like move things through your body. So there is like a somatic element for sure. But all of these things together, and then a lot of times women feel like we're doing all this work and like the guys are doing nothing and we're trying to solve it, like you said, doing all these things. But being able to like each have our own stuff and then come together and have language about it is just like, it's really, really powerful stuff. I'm so grateful that you're doing this. And it really shows how much impact it's having in the world just by like how many people are like flooding your Instagram feed saying like, this is me too. Like this is us. And I don't want to walk away. I want to find a way to make this better. I want to feel like we're on the same team again
Yeah.
through all of this. We need each other. And it's really, really beautiful stuff. So
Yeah, and it's not easy work, is what I like to tell people, because a lot of times, if you've been married for quite some time, you've created those patterns like we talked about, and you get to this point and you're like, "Do I want to keep doing this?" I mean, I think both of you actually probably asked that question. And, I think a lot of people are, they can make their own choice, and some relationships run a course. I'm not saying that everybody has to stay in a relationship that's run its course, and neither person, is getting benefits out of it. But for those that do want to, you've got to put in this work, unfortunately. But it
yeah.
is very fortunate. It's fortunate work, but
Mhm.
it's hard work, is what I'm trying to say. And being very, very honest about this stage of life. This is where it gets good. I'm telling you. Like I said, we
Yeah.
struggled for over a year, and not that we didn't have other things that we struggled over different parts of our life, because we did. But when we just got here, it hurt, and it felt long, and it felt painful. And
Mhm.
once we went through these steps, talked about it, got on the same page, was very honest about things. Like, I would say, like, I don't want to cook dinner every night anymore, and I'm just not doing it. And, I was just honest about it. And I said, so you're going to have to pick up, the other nights. I'm only doing 3. So you need to pick up the other 3 or 2 or whatever. We're going to eat out. I don't care, and it was just like, okay, that's good, because it
Yeah.
had been on me every night to come in and cook. And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't because I said I'm the cooker. It was just like, hey, I got home first. Hey, I started dinner. And he would always clean up. So it wasn't like we weren't in a partnership in it, but it was like, I'm just freaking tired of cooking. I don't want to do
Yeah.
it.
And
And
when we
just,
crack open like that, it's like we crack through the stuff that's all really hard, and what's on the inside is like it's the
yeah,
gold that we're looking for,
it
right? That's
is.
where the treasure is.
It
And it's so
is.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to
It's,
respect everybody's time. I don't want to cut you
yes.
off. Um, but I know for sure there's some people that are going to need to hop off and get back to work now. So first, I just want to like thank everybody for being here. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. If you're watching the replay, we will stay on. I'll stop the recording. If anybody has any questions, we can do that. If anybody has a question for the recording, raise their hand or unmute now. No. Okay. Um, but after the session, please come and hang out in the Held Sessions community. Brooke is going to be in the community. She can answer some questions over the next couple of weeks in the chat. Um, you're side eyeing. I'm assuming, I'm hoping. Um, and so, yeah, or if you have any questions, forward them to me. We can connect. And yeah, thanks, Lisa. So this is so great. And honestly, so wonderful. And I just wanted to let everybody know too, we've got our next workshop is going to be on sleep, and it's going to be with me and Carly McConkey together. We'll be like tag teaming experts talking about all things related to sleep, which we all need. Um, and yeah, but thank you so much, Brooke. This has really been so wonderful. I'm so grateful. Is there anything else that you want to say to everybody before we wrap?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Shauna. It was a great time. And, I just want people to think about just think about building the next version of your marriage together, because this is really the time to get so honest about what you need, what your spouse needs. And once you're talking about it, it just becomes so much more meaningful. So just know that if you can reflect, you can communicate, you can really have a really strong marriage at this point in life.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. Thank you.